Because sneak attack can trigger once per turn, a keystone of optimizing a rogue for damage is finding a way to use it more than once per round. With a multi-class using War Domain Cleric and the Rogue, we can achieve all of this and more. Welcome to D&D build number 29, the War Domain Rogue. My name is Nathan, and here on this channel I make videos about character builds and other D&D content. While I enjoy optimizing and my builds typically represent somewhat optimized characters, they're just one way to play a character, and my goal here is really to share something that I enjoyed creating with the hope that will inspire you for a future character, whether you follow the exact build I'm going to outline today or do something else. So, with all that said, here is the agenda for this video. First, I will introduce and kind of talk about the concept of this build as a whole, and then we'll take you through from level 1 to level 17 in our build progression. And at each of our key thresholds, so that'll be level 6, level 9, level 13, and level 17, I will give a damage report and kind of talk about the tactics of this character, as well as some of the other things that they're capable of beyond just damage. And after all that, we will summarize and kind of talk about the character as a whole and compare them to other kind of general baseline things. With that said, as of the recording of this video, we are currently at 480 subscribers here on the channel, and hitting 500 would be a major milestone and accomplishment for me. So if you like this content, liking the videos, subscribing to the channel, and commenting on the video goes a long way to help the channel and help others find this content. So if that's you, thank you. All right, so let's move into our introduction and build concept. So the main goal here is to utilize the War Cleric's conditionless bonus action attack to enable 2 sneak attacks per round with the ready action. Now, at its core, this is a build designed to optimally output range damage as a rogue by using the double sneak attack technique. Now, if you don't know what this is, the way this works is because rogue's sneak attack triggers once per turn and not once on your turn or once per round, you could potentially trigger it a second time every round by attacking on a different turn using a reaction. If you want a little more information on this, by the way, I've covered this more in depth on my recent rogue class overview video that you can check out up over there. All right, another thing this character is going to have is you're going to be a flexible and efficient range damage dealer with options for both support and control. In combat, this character is going to be very flexible, and you will have more options than just dealing damage, and you can fill a variety of roles when needed. As a matter of fact, in a real game, I don't think I would be going with the max damage output tactics of this character every single turn, and this character is going to have an ability to flex and adapt as needed to help the party do the best that they possibly can. We're going to have numerous efficient low-level spells and an efficient action economy. And I will say, this build is also pretty similar mechanically to my Arcane Trickster build, and I'll post a link to that up there as well, which is another double sneak attack build that uses Sorcerer instead of Cleric as kind of the chassis in order to be able to perform multiple sneak attacks per round. This build obviously is going to end up as a dexterity and wisdom-based character, as opposed to that build is a charisma-based character. Another thing that I really like about this particular character is they're going to be adept and proficient out of combat with a variety of skills. We're going to have a lot of various skills and spells and are going to end up being very well-rounded and an effective contributor at every pillar of play, depending on how you allocate things and how your party is structured. With that said, the books you will need for this character, you will need the 2024 Player's Handbook, as well as Xanathar's Guide to Everything for a particular feat, and maybe a spell or two, depending on how your table plays. Additionally, with this build, I'm going to have 2 different versions of the build. So the first one is going to use Arcane Trickster as the rogue subclass, and this version I would gently title the Marshal of Corellon Lorethian. So Corellon is the elvish god of magic, music, other arts, and warfare. And this lines up really well from an RP perspective with this version of the build. The other version is going to use the Assassin Rogues subclass, and anything that you see in white on the screen from here on out are options specifically for the Assassin version of the build. Bane or maybe Baal are great examples of a god of warfare who potentially could include assassins among their clergy, and these are just kind of potential options of how I would RP this. I find both these subclasses compelling. I think personally I favor the Arcane Trickster version a little more for a character I would play, but I want to include the Assassin here because the level progression is very similar and a lot of the choices are going to end up being the same. All right, so at level 1, we are going to be beginning as a Rogue. Now, we're going to pick Rogue as our starting class over Cleric to ensure that we have our weapon proficiencies, because you don't get them from Cleric, and you won't also have them if you multi-class into Rogue out of Cleric, and it will also net us an extra skill in the end. Therefore, as a Rogue, we're proficient in Dexterity and Intelligence saves. We get 4 Rogue skills. We get simple weapons and all martial weapons that have the finesse or light properties only, and we're proficient with light armor as well as thieves tools. And we'll discuss what skills you might want to pick a little later when we're talking about our species and our background. Also at level 1, we get expertise in 2 skills. We get our sneak attack, which is we'll be at 1d6. We get thieves cant plus 1 other language of our choice, and we get weapon mastery with 2 weapons of our choice. Now, one of these you want to be the short bow. The short bow is going to be our main weapon, and it has the Vex mastery, which will potentially allow us to chain advantage. For your other mastery, I would probably pick a melee weapon. I'd recommend one of the ones I have in parentheses on the screen over here. But that said, you don't really ever want to be caught in melee with this build, and staying at range is going to be ideal, and you'll perform a lot better. The short bow, by the way, is the choice over the hand crossbow, mainly because it has a longer range, and it's also cheaper to buy, so it's a little easier on your gold. As for our starting equipment, we get 100 gold from our class plus 50 out of our background. We are going to be using the gold buy method here, and I would go with some studded leather armor, a short bow, arrows in a quiver, some thieves tools, and a holy symbol. You could have scale mail instead. You might want this at level 2 once we get armor out of our cleric levels, and you'll potentially want to be using medium armor until you have 20 dexterity or you find good magic light armor. And feel free to snag some daggers if you want, if you have some spare gold or another melee weapon. You may also want a component pouch and maybe your other artisan's tools that we're going to get out of our background. As for our background, we're going to want to go with a custom background on this character. There isn't really a background in the player's handbook that gives us the stats we want, the origin feat that we want, and the tools that we want. The Wayfarer version is pretty close for the Assassin version of the build. But anyway, for our custom background, we want to pick Dexterity and Wisdom are the ones we want to increase. For your third one, it doesn't really matter. For our origin feat with the Arcane Trickster version, I want Musician. Otherwise, we want Lucky. You can pick whatever you want for skills. Again, I'll talk about this in a little bit. And for your tools, if your game is using crafting, I would potentially want to go with leather workers or wood carvers to potentially be able to craft items. Now, I'll talk about why we want these origin feats here. So Musician, it's going to give us a number of allies equal to our proficiency bonus, heroic inspiration whenever we finish a long rest or a short rest. And this build is going to have some interesting tools to force short rests on a short interval. As for the lucky feat, so our Marshal of Corellin version of this build is going to have a way to pretty easily swap targets by using a familiar to get advantage if you need to change targets. However, the Assassin version is not going to have that. So the reason why we want the Lucky Origin feat is we can use a charge of this, which basically gives us an advantage on any d20 test. You got to use it before you roll. And we can use this a number of times per long rest equal to our proficiency bonus. As the Assassin version, we can use this to switch targets to make sure we have advantage to keep attacking and that kind of thing. So that's the general plan for that Origin feat on that version of the build. As for our ability scores, we are going to go with the point buy method as always. We're going to get a 15 in Dexterity and put our +1 there, a 14 Constitution, a 10 Intelligence, and a 15 in Wisdom with our +2. We're going to start with a higher Wisdom on this character, but eventually we will get both our Wisdom and our Dexterity to 20. For our race, we are going to use the Elf out of the 2024 Player's Handbook. You are a medium humanoid with a 30-foot speed and a dark vision out to a range of 60 feet. And as for our Elven lineage, we are going to pick the High Elf. Now, the High Elf specifically gives us a wizard cantrip that we can change out every long rest, and we can pick the attribute we want to use, and we're going to pick Wisdom. And when the wizard cantrip, we're going to lock it into True Strike and leave it there. So importantly, this race, the elf, not only gives us access to a racial feat that we want later, but it also makes it so we don't have to take Magic Initiate Wizard for our origin feat to be able to get True Strike. Because the True Strike cantrip enables us to make attacks with our Wisdom modifier instead of Dexterity, and it provides cantrip scaling at levels 5, 11, and 17. This is kind of one of the big things that will enable us to have more damage on this character. We also get Fey Ancestry, so advantage against some kinds of saves. We have proficiency in Insight, Perception, or Survival, and we have Trance, so we can gain the benefits of a long rest in only 4 hours instead of the normal 8. Now, as for our skills, there are a lot that you can potentially get here. So we can pick 4 skills out of our class. We can pick 1 of 3 skills out of our race, and any 2 skills from our background. So I've highlighted the ones I just might pick here in a vacuum. So Investigation, Perception, Sleight of Hand, Stealth, Survival, and then Arcana and Acrobatics from your background are just some recommendations. For the ones in Expertise, I would say get Investigation and Stealth. I think Stealth is the only one I would say you should put an Expertise in. The other ones can vary. Sleight of Hand is now the skill you use to pick locks, but we also have Thieves' Tools proficiencies. So if you're proficient with both the tool and the skill, you can make the check with advantage per the rules. So that's great. Take Arcana out of your background if you want to be able to craft magic items. And the skills I picked are kind of for a sneaky investigator and woodsman, but you could tool for just about anything. For example, you could take Expertise in charisma skills if your party needed a talker face character kind of a deal. All right, moving on to level 2, we are going to be a first level cleric, and this gives us training with medium armor and shields. We also get our divine order here. I'm going to pick Thaumaturge. This gives us +1 cleric cantrip, and what allows us to add our wisdom to arcana and religion checks. We also get our cleric spellcasting here. So we have 4 cleric cantrips. I'd recommend Guidance, Resistance, Toll the Dead, and Word of Radiance. And then our +1, we have True Strike out of our race. We can prepare 4 spells here. You can swap these out on a long rest, so feel free to pick the ones you need. But these are the ones I might prepare. Bless is great for a party buff. Healing Word to pick somebody up. Guiding Bolt to blast and provide advantage. And then Sanctuary to potentially protect us or another character. At this point, we probably want to swap to medium armor when we can. I'd recommend a breastplate if you want to not have disadvantage on your stealth. Moving on to level 3, we are going to be a second level cleric, which means we get detect magic out of being a high elf, so we can cast it once per long rest without spending a spell slot, as well as cast it with any spell slots we have. It is a ritual, so that is great. And we also get our Channel Divinity here as a cleric, which we can cast once per short rest. We get 2 charges, and we get 1 back on a short rest, and all of them back on a long rest. And you get Divine Spark, which does a little damage or healing, and Turn Undead. I don't see using the Channel Divinity options particularly often on this character. Moving on to level 4, we are going to be a third level cleric, which means we get our subclass, which is the War Domain. So this gives us a Channel Divinity called Guided Strike. It gives us Guiding Bolt, Magic Weapon, Shield of Faith, and Spiritual Weapon, always prepared. And we get this feature called War Priest, which lets us attack as a bonus action a number of times per short rest equal to our Wisdom modifier. We are also up to a second level caster here, and I would want to make sure to prepare Prayer of Healing and potentially Aid. Now, a few things I want to talk about here. So what Guided Strike does is we can boost one of our attacks by +10 or an ally's attack if we use our reaction. I'm not planning on using that very much because we need our reaction for ourselves. But our plan is to use this in round 1, probably on our first attack, to make sure that hit lands to get our Vex chain going. War Priest is our main kind of build around feature, and at this point here at level 4, we are basically online and can potentially start doing double sneak attacks every round. I'm going to prepare Prayer of Healing to sneak in an extra short rest between the first and second encounters for my daily average kind of calculation. And I'll talk about why that's good when we get there. There's also a ton of great support options on the cleric list, so prepare what you need. Moving on to level 5, we're going to jump back to Rogue. This gives us Cunning Action. So as a bonus action, we can dash, disengage, or hide. As a high elf, we can also cast Misty Step once per long rest for free, as well as cast it with any spell slots that we have, which is great. And the power of our cantrips goes up as a 5th level character. Interesting fact now, our True Strike at this point now does 3d6 damage, which is just a little bit less damage than a straight rogue would do at this point. They would do 4d6 with a 3d6 sneak attack. Finally, at level 6, we are going to be a Rogue 3. This is the last level before our first damage report, and there are a bunch of features here. So first, we get steady aim, which we might plan on using if we need to switch targets and we're out of War Priest charges. Our sneak attack bumps to 2d6, and we get our Rogue subclass. So the one I'm going to be using for the main part for this build is going to be the Arcane Trickster. We get our wizard-ish spellcasting, and we get Mage Hand Legerdemain. For the Rogue cantrips, we get Mage Hand +2. I would take, say, Minor Illusion and Mold Earth. You can kind of pick whatever you want here, but don't pick spells in general that need your Intelligence modifier, because it's going to, it's 10 and it's not going to go up. We get 3 spells here of our choice. Pick what you want. The main thing we want to have is Find Familiar. Very powerful spell, and enables us to get the help action. You're probably going to want to use an owl to fly in and out of range with its flyby attack feature. For the other ones, I would say take Absorb Elements and Shield, because we can use our reaction to make attacks and optimize our damage output doesn't mean that's always going to be the best thing to do. And these reaction spells are very good. You could also potentially take Silvery Barbs here if you want, or you could potentially skip the reaction spells if you wanted more utility. As for our Unholy Assassin version, obviously this version takes the Assassin subclass, which gives them advantage on initiative, and then whenever they deal damage with a sneak attack to a target in the first round of combat, you can apply extra damage equal to your rogue level. Additionally, they also get advantage on attacks against creatures that haven't taken a turn yet. They also get Assassin's Tools, so they get some extra tool proficiencies, and then you just acquire some Poisoners and I believe a Disguise kit, which is pretty nice. So this version of the build wants to Alpha Strike in round 1 and can use the War Cleric thing to do that. So here at level 6, it is time for our first damage report. So let's kind of talk about what the tactics of this character are. So our tactics aren't really going to change as we level up, so I'm going to try to explain them in detail here, and then as we go on, I will give them less. So for our main Arcane Trickster version of the build, in the first round, we're going to use our bonus action to attack our target with our War Priest charge. We're going to use our Channel Divinity to help us land a hit, and our Familiar can potentially help to provide advantage if it goes before us. Now, I'm going to assume here that for this first attack that we are going to be able to sneak attack the target if we hit, whether we have an ally there or our Familiar can help and that kind of thing. Then with our action in the first round, we are going to ready a True Strike to fire off on the next turn. If we hit our target, we will have advantage from Vex, so this will also qualify for a sneak attack. In round 2 and beyond, we're basically going to repeat this process until we're out of War Priest charges. We're going to use our Familiar to transfer targets or potentially compensate for a miss. Once we are out of War Priest charges, we're just going to use either Steady Aim or Cunning Action Hide to get advantage and fire away with True Strikes on our turn. As for the Assassin version, we're basically going to do the same thing minus the Familiar, and we're going to use our Lucky Origin feat to compensate for a miss or transfer targets. The only big difference there is that in the first round, we do get advantage automatically, assuming our target hasn't acted yet, and we do get to apply 3 extra damage from our rogue level twice because we're dealing damage with sneak attack twice in the first round. So our numbers here. So for our peak damage per round, so this is our maximum damage output. I calculate this against both AC of 10 and a higher AC as we go up. Our Arcane Trickster version is going to do 32.2 peak damage per round against an armor class of 10 and 29 against 15, and the Assassin is 38.1 and 33.1. For our max output, so this is an encounter where we have all our resources, and this is our damage averaged over 4 rounds. So against our enemy with an armor class of 15, the Arcane Trickster version does 25.2 damage per round, and the Assassin does 26.2. And then our daily average, so the way I calculate this is I have 4 encounters with a short rest in the middle. And I calculate our total average damage per round across those 16 rounds of combat. Now, for this build in particular, I'm going to be assuming that we're using Prayer of Healing to refresh our War Priest charges between the first 2 encounters. So it basically gives us an extra short rest. Note that doing this will also potentially trigger Musician if you have that origin feat to give everyone heroic inspiration, which is great. So our daily average at this point against an armor class of 15 is 22.8 for the Arcane Trickster version and 23.9 for the Assassin version. Importantly, you're basically out of charges for the last round of every combat, and the fourth and final combat of the day, you basically don't have any War Priest charges, so you're doing very basic rogue things. These builds actually kind of bracket my Draconic Trickster build for the most part. The Unholy Assassin version is a little bit higher damage, and the Marshal of Corellon is a little bit lower. So I'll compare to that build and show some graphs for that at the end of the video when we kind of summarize. All right. Another thing here is we have a lot of interesting kind of support and control options we can potentially go along with this. We can potentially cast Command and still attack as a bonus action to sneak attack, which is pretty solid. We can cast Blast. We have a potentially hold person. Now, one of the important things to note here is if you want to concentrate on a spell, you'll need to ready a normal attack, as taking the ready action to ready a spell does use your concentration, and True Strike is a spell. So if you're going to want to concentrate on something like Bless or Hold Person, you need to take what I call the hybrid approach. And the way that you would do this is basically after you cast your spell and you do your bonus action attack, you would ready a normal attack instead of True Strike. So you have that trade-off of you're using your dexterity and you don't get the cantrip scaling on your damage, but you do have the advantage of being able to concentrate on an important spell like Bless. All right, moving on to level 7, we are going to be a 4th level cleric, and we get our first ability score increase or feat. So for the martial version with the Arcane Trickster, we are going to take Inspiring Leader and boost our wisdom up to 18. So the cool thing about this is that it provides temporary hit points to a bunch of people, which can include yourself, whenever you finish a short rest or a long rest. And guess what? This also triggers when you cast a spell like Prayer of Healing, which will go along with your Musician. As for the Assassin version, we're going to take Fey Touched, and boost our wisdom to 18. And I want to pick up the Gift of Alacrity spell to boost our initiative by a d8. This is really important for the assassin to make sure that they go before their targets so they have advantage, and Gift of Alacrity is just great here. And another free casting of Misty Step is great, even though we already have it from High Elf. You could also take a different wisdom thing here on the assassin, but this one is really nice. The reason that we're boosting wisdom here is obviously because True Strike does a little bit more damage than our normal attacks. If you're going to go to level 20, consider delaying or skipping Cleric 4. The reason for this is if we delay it until level 19 or 20, we can potentially snag a second epic boon, or if we skip it entirely, we can get our rogue subclass capstone at rogue level 17. That said, I really, for most campaigns and long before this, and having this power spike now, I think I would probably want to use, and especially for the Arcane Trickster version of the build, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. We do get some more prepared spells here and another cantrip. Of course, pick whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. At level 8, we are going to be a Rogue 4, and we're going to take Rogue levels from here on out on this build. So for both versions of the build, we're going to take the Elven Accuracy feat and boost our Dexterity our Dexterity up to 17. Elven Accuracy is just very powerful. It essentially allows us to roll a third d20 when we have advantage, and that really locks in our accuracy. From here on out, our hit chance is going to be like in the upper 90s, and a miss is very unlikely. The Marshal of Corellon Lathander gets another spell option here. Pick whatever you want. Here's just some options: Disguise Self, Jump, Silvery Barbs if it's allowed and you didn't have it from before. We're mainly, again, looking for utility because we don't have the spell casting ability to cast spells that really use our intelligence. Moving on to level 9, we are going to be a Rogue 5, so we are up to 3d6 sneak attack, and we get Cunning Strike. This is a feature that allows us to spend some of our sneak attack dice to potentially cause effects instead of damage. The DC here will be based on your dexterity, and we can potentially poison an enemy to give them the poison condition. We can trip them to knock them prone, or we can withdraw to potentially allow ourselves to move without provoking opportunity attacks. These are somewhat helpful. There might be situations where you might want to trip an enemy to support a melee ally, or withdraw to get out of range and that kind of thing, but I don't think they're really that great. A lot of enemies are immune to the poisoned condition, and if you trip an enemy, you won't be able to have advantage against them with range attacks. So I don't see using these all that often, and they don't provide a boost to the damage of this character. But that said, there are situations where they might be useful. We also get Uncanny Dodge here, which allows us to use our reaction, so it conflicts with the damage per round plan, to potentially half damage from an attack that hits us. Again, I don't potentially see you doing the damage per round tactic every single turn. So if you need to defend yourself, leaving your reaction up for shield, absorb elements, and or uncanny dodge those are good things to do. And in a real game, I would expect you'd want to do that some of the time. All right, here at level 9, it is time for our next damage report. So what has changed since last time? Well, we've boosted our wisdom to 18, which importantly gives us 4 uses of War Priest per long rest. So we can now potentially do our damage per round tactic every single round of a combat. We've gained Elven Accuracy to max out our hit chance, as well as boost our crit chance. And our sneak attack has jumped up to 3d6. We've also gained Uncanny Dodge as a potential defensive option, as well as a feat with either Inspiring Leader or Gift of Alacrity if you're the assassin. Our tactics haven't really changed. We're just numerically better with Elven Accuracy and having a higher wisdom for our bigger attack. And we have more War Priest charges for better longevity throughout a longer adventuring day. All right, so our damage per round, you can see the numbers there. I don't think I necessarily need to read them here at this point. Again, more wisdom, more War Priest charges, more damage output. We've increased our peak damage per round here by about 40%, and our max output and daily average by about 60%, again, due to having more charges. Our support and control options haven't really expanded all that much, although we do have more spell slots at this point. But using our spells and the hybrid approaches are still very effective. And again, we are bracketing the Draconic Trickster here in terms of our damage output. So the Marshal of Corellin version is a little bit lower, and the Assassin version is a little bit higher on damage. Moving on to level 10, we're going to be a Rogue 6, so we get 2 more expertises. Pick whatever you want. We are now a 6th level caster, but no new spells on the menu. We are still at 1st level Wizard spells and 2nd level Cleric spells. At level 11, we will be a Rogue 7, so 46 on our sneak attack. We get Evasion, which is great. It enables us to, against effects that target dexterity saves. If we pass the save and would take half damage, we take no damage. And if we fail the save, we take half damage, which is great for our durability. We also get Reliable Talent, which enables us to treat... when we make a d20 test for a skill that we're proficient in, we can treat any roll of 9 or lower on the dice as a 10, which is great. And the power of our cantrips also goes up. We also importantly get access to 2nd level wizard spells here, and we get to prepare 2 new ones. I would almost certainly take Invisibility for potential advantage on initiative, as well as potentially on our first attack in combat. And this spell does upcast well, and you can turn multiple characters invisible, like yourself and your ally. Another spell I might take here is Cloud of Daggers. This one scales very well with upcasting and doesn't care about our spell save DC, which does make it a great option for damage if desired. And you could pick whatever you want here. And of course, you can also retrain, and we can use our concentration spells if you pick them in combat with the hybrid approach. Another example of a good defensive spell you might want to take is, say, Mirror Image. That could be a good option, especially if you can cast it before combat. Moving on to level 12, we are going to be a Rogue level 8, and I'm going to take Mage Slayer and boost our dexterity to 18 on both versions. Mage Slayer is absolutely amazing for our mental defenses because it lets us pass a save that we would fail once per short or long rest. If you need some more convincing on the math on that, I have done a full kind of video on that you can check out up there for kind of the breakdown. Additionally, boosting our dexterity also helps our attacks, and about half of them or more are going to be using our dexterity, especially if you are using the hybrid approach and concentrating on a spell like Bless. Moving on to level 13, we are a Rogue 9, so up to 5d6 on sneak attack, and we get our next subclass feature. So the Marshal is going to get Magical Ambush, which this gives enemies disadvantage on saving throws against our spells on the turn that we cast them if we have the invisible condition. So this actually enables some really solid control with our cleric spells, namely the command spell Maybe Hold Person by using Cunning Action Hide. So if you're in a situation where the party doesn't need your damage, but you need to lock down some important enemies, you can Cunning Action Hide, which you will automatically pass that hide check because of Reliable Talent at this point. The minimum that you can get is 10 plus your dexterity plus our proficiency, potentially doubled. So that'll be a very high number. And then you can cast Upcast Command here, potentially targeting 4 creatures with, say, Halt, and they do nothing. And they have disadvantage on those saves, and that is a fairly high DC. So that is a great tactic here. Now the assassin gets infiltration expertise, which is kind of a ribbon in a ways. The only real impactful thing is their roving aim feature, which lets them not drop their speed to 0 when they steady aim, but we're not really using that very much as our bonus action is in pretty high demand to do our double sneak attack tactic. Here, level 13, it is time for our next damage report. So what have we gained in the last 4 levels? Well, we've bumped our dexterity to 18, we've bumped our sneak attack by 2d6, and our cantrips have scaled back at rogue level 11. For some things that are not necessarily related to damage, we've gained reliable talent, evasion, mage slayer for our mental saves, as well as magical ambush or infiltration expertise, depending on the version of our build. An interesting thing here is, with reliable talent, even if you have disadvantage from, say, something like half plate armor, you'll still automatically pass the DC 15 hide check. I think if we had expertise at this level, our minimum on that roll would be a 24, which is pretty crazy. Our tactics, again, have not really changed. Continue to use the hybrid approach if you want to concentrate on spells. The control option in particular for our Marshal of Corellon Lorethian version is a lot better thanks to magical ambush. In terms of our damage, we are doing pretty well here. We're up to a little over 60 average damage per round for our typical encounters of 4 rounds, and our daily average is also doing pretty well, a little over 50. And pretty much for all our metrics across the board, we are at a 50% damage increase or so. Again, note the peak damage per round of the assassin version is going to be in round 1, and you'll see that at this level, it's about 18 points higher than the Arcane Trickster version, and that is because we are applying that extra damage equal to our rogue level twice, basically. We've gained a total of 3d6 damage on our True Strike in this range, thanks to our cantrip and sneak attack scaling. And again, we are still bracketing that Draconic Trickster build, so the Assassin version does more damage, and the Arcane Trickster version does a little bit less damage. Although I will say at this point, the Draconic Trickster is winning on the daily average because these 2 builds that we're presenting today are still out of resources for that 4th combat encounter. All right, moving on to level 14, we're going to be a Rogue 10, which means we get Rogue's unique extra feat here, and we're going to take +2 dex and cap it at 20. You could potentially boost your wisdom instead, but as it stands, dexterity is important for a lot of our attacks, especially if we're going with the hybrid approach. This also will potentially help our armor class if we want to swap to light armor, as well as our initiative. We do get some more spells here. Pick your favorites. There's nothing in particular that stands out that I haven't already mentioned. Moving on to level 15, we're going to be a Rogue 11, so up to 66 on our sneak attack, and we get improved Cunning Strike. This lets us use 2 Cunning Strike options per sneak attack. Again, we still only have those base 3, so poison, trip, and withdraw. I don't really see you using this unless for some reason you wanted to trip and poison on the same attack. Moving on to level 16, we are going to be a Rogue level 12, and we get another ability score increase or feat. So let's cap our wisdom at 20 to get another War Priest charge, as well as help our True Strike attacks. If you wanted to take 20 wisdom at level at Rogue 10 and 20 dex at this level, you absolutely could. It's not a big deal. We just want to make sure we cap both of those. We are now an 8th level caster, although we're still at 2nd level spells in both Wizard and Cleric. And finally, at level 17, the last level I kind of do detailed progression for, we are going to be a Rogue 13, so 7d6 on our sneak attack. For our subclass features, we get either Versatile Trickster or Envenom weapons for the Assassin version, and the power of our cantrips goes up here. And importantly, we also get 3rd level spells. So the ones I want to make sure to take Catnap. I'll explain a little bit about this in a bit, and then potentially Major Image for the second one. Pick your favorite. There's also some interesting retrains that you can do. So for subclass features, Versatile Trickster potentially lets us trip a second target if they're within 5 feet of our mage hand. For the Arcane Trickster, casting the Mage Hand as well as controlling it are both bonus actions, but our bonus action economy is pretty strapped, so I don't see you using this really all that often, even though it potentially can be useful. In Venom weapons, what this does for the Assassin is it lets them potentially add a little bit of extra damage to the Poison Cunning Strike option. However, I have done some math on this. and the damage dice it costs you to potentially poison is only worth it for damage if the target has a Constitution saving throw of +6 or less. At this level, I think a lot of enemies would probably have a higher Constitution saving throw modifier and or be immune or resistant to poison damage. So I'm not going to plan on using this in our calculations, but it is a slight damage boost if you do have the right conditions. As for our spells, so what Catnap does is it basically is another spell like Prayer of Healing that allows us to give ourselves and potentially some other characters in the party the benefits of a short rest in just 10 minutes. Now, with the way I'm doing our long combat days, this spell allows me to sneak in an extra short rest between encounters 3 and 4. So it will give our Arcane Trickster version full resources in terms of their War Priest charges for that last encounter of the day. Honestly, I'd only take this spell if you're using Prayer of Healing a lot to get short rests, and having another way to do that would be beneficial. Again, you can only benefit from the extra short rest provided by these spells once per long rest. Major Image is a really cool utility spell that upcasts well. If you cast it with a 4th level or higher slot, the illusion from it lasts until dispelled, which is really cool. There's a lot of retrains that you can do here, and a spell like Counterspell or Fly are great options. And if your party needs that kind of utility or defensiveness, you can absolutely take those. Do note that if you take Counterspell, it will use your Rogue save DC based off your Wisdom. I mean, not your Wisdom, your Intelligence, to kind of check if the spell fails. So that might not be the best option on this build where our spellcasting modifier is not that high. All right, so here at level 17, it is time for our final damage report. So what has changed since last time? Well, we've capped both our Wisdom and our Dexterity. We've bumped our Sneak Attack up to 7d6 and have gotten some cantrip scaling. We've also gained Catnap and potentially another 1 or 2 third level spells, as well as a subclass feature. And again, per the encounter rules, the Catnap spell lets my Arcane Trickster version get a 3rd short rest with the way I do encounters. We also do have a 5th War Priest charge here, which will be helpful for the Assassin version of the build for their last encounter of the day. All right, again, tactics-wise, they haven't really changed, and having the extra War Priest charge is helpful if you have a longer encounter and just overall resource longevity in general. So here are our numbers here at this level. So our peak damage per round for our Arcane Trickster version is at 86 and 83.9 against the low and high armor classes. And for our Assassin version, we are at 112 and 109.2. Again, that version of the build is adding plus 26 to instances of flat 13 to its damage, which is why it's higher here. Our max output, which is our total damage averaged over a 4-round combat encounter when we have all our resources. And I only look at the high and reasonable ACs here. Against armor class of 18, the Arcane Trickster version is at 83.1, and the Assassin is at a 90.3. For our daily average, the Arcane Trickster version now has enough resources, thanks to Catnap, to be able to do the same thing every single encounter for the 4 encounters I check, so we're still at 83.1. And the Assassin drops a little bit due to not having Catnap to 83.5. Overall, we're at about a 35% increase for peak damage output and maxed output damage, but a 40 to 50% bump for our daily average, depending on our build, thanks to more charges and the extra short rest from the Catnap. We're still basically bracketing our Draconic Trickster. So again, the Martial Arcane Trickster version here with the War Cleric is a little bit less damage in that build, and the Assassin damage is a little bit higher than that build. Although that build does perform a little bit worse than both these builds on the whiteboard at this level due to wasting a bonus action in the first round to set up innate sorcery. All right, so it's time to summarize and talk about this build as a whole. So what is the overall score of this build? So the way I calculate this is I take all our damage numbers at all of our different damage reports and I average them into one number, and we look at our peak damage per round, which is our first score here, as well as our max output and our daily average numbers. So our peak score is 55.1 or 69.6 for the Assassin version. And for our max output, we're at 52.5 and 56.4. And for our daily average, we're at 49.1 and 51.4. So an interesting point of comparison, again, just to look at how well our other kind of optimized double sneak attack rogue, the Draconic Trickster, did. So that version is at 61.3, 52.5, and 49.9. Its score is very similar here, which I thought was pretty interesting. The Draconic Trickster has better control than either of these builds do by a long shot. I think the Martial here is better at support, and obviously our Unholy Assassin sacrifices both of those things in the name of a bit better damage. If we want to put all these on a graph here, just looking at our daily average, you can see the Marshal here in blue, the Unholy Assassin in red, and the Draconic Trickster in yellow. So again, they're all pretty close, just for a little bit more visual comparison here. Important to note that the Draconic Trickster has a much easier time swapping targets thanks to just natural locked-in advantage from innate sorcery. And both of these builds, you may need to plan and think ahead a little bit when it comes to that. All right, so just looking at all of the 2024 builds I've done, this build and both its versions pretty much fall in line with the bulk of my builds, like that middle 75%. My Fiend Knight build is that top line there is basically in a tier of its own, and the build on the bottom, the Initiative Support, which was about a month ago, is certainly not designed for damage. So, some things about this build. If I was going to take this version of the build to level 20, the Arcane Trickster version specifically, I would go Rogue 16. Now, if you knew you were going all the way to 20, you could consider delaying Cleric 4 to get 2 epic boon feats, but I don't think that's necessarily worth it. I think if I was going to do the Arcane Trickster version of this build, I would probably, again, take that level in Cleric back at level 5 or 7. Rogue 17 potentially could be worth it for the Unholy Assassin for like the double sneak attack damage, but it is pretty late and does require a saving throw. The Marshal doesn't have enough intelligence really to use the Arcane Trickster capstone very well, which is called Spell Thief. So I think I'd much rather have the extra feat from Cleric 4 pretty much whenever you took it, whether that was at level 19 or way back at level 7. All right, one of the things I really like about this build is our kind of Prayer of Healing catnap combos. So for the Marshal version, this is our Arcane Trickster version specifically, using these spells or just generally taking a short rest has pretty amazing power for us and our party. It refreshes all our resources. It grants temporary hit points from Inspiring Leader, as well as grants heroic inspiration from our Musician feat. So there's a lot of really cool things that you can do with that. This build is also, I find, to be very multifaceted and quite powerful, especially the Marshal version of the build. Our Marshal of Corellan Lorathian. We can do a little bit of everything. We've got support. We've got great skills in a variety of areas depending on what you wanted to pick. We've got solid damage. We can provide solid control, although not necessarily with our concentration, thanks to Magical Ambush plus Command. The Unholy Assassin version trades in a lot of this utility for a little bit of extra damage. I think personally, if I had to choose between the Arcane Trickster version of this War Domain Rogue build or the Assassin version, I personally would pick the Arcane Trickster version, which is the main one I presented here. I think I would just like that better for how I personally like to play the game. I do want to emphasize again here, the hybrid approach where instead of readying True Strike, you just ready a normal attack. Importantly, lets us hold concentration on a spell like Bless. It does cost us a little bit of damage, but in a real game, I think this is absolutely something that would be worth doing a lot of the time, and the damage lost to concentrate on Bless is probably more than made up for by the damage boost it would be to our party, not only for their attack rolls, but also for their saving throws to keep them firing on all cylinders. Another thing again here is that there are trade-offs to going for the max damage per round tactic. The main downside being, of course, that it consumes our reaction. There are situations where having our reaction available for defense or maybe even support will be important, and I don't think you would always go max damage per round every round in a real game with this character, and this is one of the reasons why I took those defensive spell options, because I think they would be important tools in our arsenal. So overall, thanks for watching. What did you think? Which version of this build, our Marshal of Corellan or our Unholy Assassin, would be more appealing to you, and what would you want to play? I think, again, for me, I like the versions that use the Arcane Trickster, whether it's this version or my Draconic Trickster, and I think they're both compelling options that I would want to try for rogue builds under the 2024 rules. If there's any builds you want me to cover in the future, by the way, please let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to oblige, and I love taking ideas and just seeing what we can kind of bring to reality together. So once again, thanks for watching. My name is Nathan, and I will see you next time.